I mean, if you look at the history of Mauritius post-independence, we used to be a monocrop industry, and over the years we have diversified into manufacturing, textile, tourism.
But it was really in the 1990s that the idea came to develop financial services in its own right as a growth sector.
We used to call it offshore in those days. Came around and we started to consider whether we could replicate what was happening in other countries that have started that business.
And basically, I would say the main consideration is really to absorb the skills, the higher skills that were coming back to the country for this.
It started for me in March 1992 when I got a phone call from the Minister of Finance, Ramasitanen. I'd heard there was an offshore conference organized by Euromoney.
So the idea was, since we did not have the expertise, is to collaborate with Euromoney. They know the people, they know the corporates, they know the big players, and to bring them to Mauritius.
Then it was felt that given our geographical position, being the hub between Asia and Africa, we need to position ourselves where the business may come from.
So between February and April, we had to redraft what will become the Mauritius Offshore Business Activities Act, the Shipping Act, because we wanted to attract some activities within that area, make a new Trust Act as such, a number of amendments, and also amendments to the Companies Act, just in time for the Euromoney conference.
It went very well, and what the government did was to actually distribute the white paper they had prepared.
So that those people who were using other jurisdictions were aware of what the ecosystem, what the fiscal incentives, and what Mauritius was offering.
And we had a bit of a double act with Rama. He would actually take the official government policy, and I would actually talk about the taxation legislation, the mixer, the tax-bearing clauses.
And all of us went on a marketing trip everywhere, from
10, 15 places. I mean, Bombay and Zurich and England, America, everywhere.
We were looking at this flow of investments and business going towards Africa. And little did we imagine it will be the other way around.
I was amazed by one gentleman who was visiting us from the US. We had a first chat on his first day in Mauritius, and then before he left, he came back to see me, as I like to get some feedback from the tour they've done and from the industry. And he said that you were all singing from the same songbook.
It was a simple song, and we were reading from the same sheet.
So basically, we had a very strong story to tell in sub-Saharan Africa and in this part of the world, which put us at a great advantage compared to other jurisdictions.
And in that business, trust and confidence is of paramount importance.
I mean, Dave was financial secretary at the time of the Euromoney conference. Dave was responsible for the whole revamping of the financial services industry in Mauritius. He passed the Offshore Banking Act in 1989, I think it was. He passed the Leasing Act, the New Stock Exchange Act, and eventually the MOBA Act for the offshore sector.
What it did is sent a clear message to the international community, to our business partners, that we have moved into the next phase of our development to give more credibility.
And whenever I went to see Dave Manraj asking for the legislation to be amended, and I said, well, look, we're attracting people here. It is true they won't pay much tax. And his standard reply to me, he said, look, we are not looking to make money out of taxing these companies. We're making employment, new jobs and highly paid jobs available to our people. But in 1991, India was a little bit pressured into having a structural adjustment program with the IMF and the World Bank.
India was a very closed economy until that time. And the combination, I think, of Prime Minister Narendra Rao and Minister of Finance Manmohan Singh, they opened up the country.
Which included opening up investment opportunities in India to foreigners.
We at Arthur Andersen set out to say what are new jurisdictions that can help us attract global investments into India. And hey, we found Mauritius.
And that's when we saw an influx of foreign-owned banks. And the reason being that we needed the big names to service the offshore sector.
So that's where the accounting firms, which were traditional in the services they offered, the legal firms were traditional in what they offered to as a service, they moved into the international sphere and they started interacting with their counterparts across the globe.
And the treaty with India was meant to encourage Indian companies to actually set up a domicile in Mauritius to go and invest in Africa and elsewhere.
And essentially, what it has turned out finally to be, it has been the channel used by the foreign investors using what that agreement offers, using Mauritius as a channel for investing into India.
And Arthur Andersen and I happened to find that opportunity. And that began the love affair with Mauritius. And it's continued since then, I must say that.
The big advantage of the India DTA was that if you made a capital gains in India, the gains were taxable in Mauritius and not in India, and we have no capital gains here. So all your capital gains from a Mauritius resident company in India were not taxed at all.
And this route was considered to be a viable route, and it really sort of set up the offshore sector.
The very first day I took up office, I signed IMM certificate of management company.
Because IMM was a joint venture between Rogers and Company Limited and a foreign party. So Rogers and Company Limited was using its secretarial department to provide, any backup that was required, to run the offshore business. But they didn't really start, they weren't flying.
So actually I was partly instrumental in convincing the partners of DCDM to start a special services under the umbrella of Multi-Consult, which was, I think, one of the first service companies to provide services on an offshore basis, attracting global investors to use Mauritius.
I went to visit Jersey and Guernsey, my colleagues, to introduce myself to the colleague regulators. And so I was put forward on the platform as the example that Jersey and Guernsey should be following, namely to regulate the industry.
Your regulators were always prepared to listen. They were always prepared to use best practices. And there was almost a passion to say that we have to remain competitive. Tax may be an advantage, but it cannot be a sustainable advantage.
I would say that this period was a very buoyant period in terms of the projects, especially coming from government. For example, I mentioned the stock exchange, I mentioned offshore banking, I mentioned the free port, suspension of exchange control, liberalization of interest rates. So during that time, there was a marked focus on making financial services another pillar of the economy.
And continue to explore opportunities of providing that stability which almost all foreign investors want.
But what has happened over the years is that we have, developed more than just the India route.
The fact that there was outstanding professional services, firms like DCDM, Multi-Consult, and now of course EQ have continued to provide high quality services. And at the end of the day, global community wants an environment and a jurisdiction that is forward looking.
I remember going to see Anil Gajadhar, he was the chairman of the FSC in the early 2000s, and talking to Iqbal Rajabali, who was director. And I took with me the list of employees of IMM. And I said, look, these guys come from every little village in Mauritius. They come from the most modest backgrounds you can imagine. Their fathers are probably laborers or bus conductors or small artisans. And by dint of hard work, they've actually obtained a diploma in accounting, something in corporate services, in law. And these guys were earning at the age of 30 3 times more than their fathers were earning at the end of his career. I said, that is social mobility.
The swiftness with which we react to opportunities was equally significant in making Mauritius what it is today. I spent a lot of time saying this. Policies matter.
MOBA Act gone, replaced by the Financial Services Development Act. The Companies Act gone, new Companies Act was voted in. The Trust Act was revamped again. And so the whole area, the whole legislative framework of the industry was stepped up.
And it was only in 2004 that we moved from the 2 category of licenses to a single license, which was the single banking license, where every bank in Mauritius could do domestic banking and could do offshore banking as well. And that has been very beneficial to the domestic banks. It has been beneficial to the jurisdiction because it has attracted big names in banking as well, and the banking sector has thrived as a result, while supporting the development of global business activities.
When you come to 2010, it's a defining moment of a decade for the global business sector because one, we've already established ourselves into the fund sector. At the same time, we were facing tremendous pressure for the renegotiation of the DTA, and the sector was aware of it.
And we kept negotiating with India, for a very, very long time, in order to maintain a balance between what is good for our country and what is acceptable for India.
So at a time when we know that there has to be a change, we were preparing for the change in the beginning of 2010, and that was visible while we were defending our own space. We were also creating a new future, particularly in the fund sector. And it's proved because in 2017, the India Treaty has been renegotiated. But that has not stopped the march of the jurisdiction. If it's so, it should have been stopped.
The first time we were under attack was in 1998 when OECD published its first report on harmful taxation.
Now, I remember we had to go and defend our jurisdiction at the OECD.
And that report listed about 54 jurisdictions which were deemed to be practicing harmful tax policies. What is interesting is that Luxembourg, Netherlands, Switzerland, Hong Kong, Singapore, none of them were mentioned there.
At times we felt when we were in that sector, and some professionals still believe, and rightly so, that we were being harshly dealt with compared to other offshore centers within the European community.
It was found that we had some deficiencies. In fact, there were 5 deficiencies, and for that reason we were put on the grey list. And for us, it was like a blue.
There was white, there was light grey, dark grey, and black. And the FATF put us on the light grey. But then when the European Union saw this, the EU didn't have 4 gradings. They had 2, black and white. So they took the light grey and put us into the black.
We couldn't afford this situation to drag on. So we had to at least act promptly. And in fact, we were given an action plan to address those deficiencies over 2 years.
At the lockdown, the financial services was one of the very rare sectors in Mauritius which was able to switch overnight to the remote working or work from home principle. We started therefore looking at the next problem.
We all joined hands together from I must say from the very beginning. We exited the FATF grey list in a record time.
I would firmly believe that it was a blessing in disguise.
We are no longer a set of institutions in a jurisdiction. We are one jurisdiction.
Everybody is appreciative of those initiatives that have been taken. And as a jurisdiction, I think we have grown up.
That these exercises were not done as a one-off exercise to get out of the list. They had to be convinced that we have got institutions, processes to be able to sustain it.
In professional services, you need to have a trusting partner and you need to have a partner who understands your need and is willing to extend himself to support you.
The young professionals that come on the market need to look at the sector that in which they can grow, in which they can contribute, and in which it can make a difference to themselves as professionals as well as to the country.
We have the fintech, we have the virtual assets. So I think, and we are having the legal framework now to how to administer those, provide those services.
But all this knowledge we have acquired, all this experience, reputation that Mauritius has, we must use all that.
We have to take everyone on board. The government, the public sector, the institutions, the authorities, and the private sector. If we all work together, we're going to do miracles here.
If we are keyed up, we are focused, we know what we are going for, and especially if we are driven by a vision of a long-term purpose. I think we are small enough, collective savvy enough, community savvy enough to be able to develop a new vision for Mauritius which can stand on its feet in the next 10 years and beyond.